Welcome to the fourth and final webinar from our series on behavior change for sustainability. So let me go ahead and share our screen here. Okay, so this is the final session in our series. Just a refresher on the journey that we have covered so far. We started with an introduction to what is behavior smart thinking and how behavior change is relevant to tourism and sustainability. Then we focused a little bit more on how that matters to destinations and destination management authorities and how they can employ behavior change in order to enhance value creation for the local community and the local places. With our previous webinar number 3, we focused on what are the benefits of using behavior change techniques for businesses, and we focused more on market success and business competitiveness. And today we're going to build on that and discuss how travel businesses can employ behavior change to enhance their sustainability efforts. So we'll talk a little bit about how we use behavior change for sustainability. Then we will look at how do we encourage travelers to do what is good for our place when we know that their attention and motivation is somewhere else. And then I'll talk to you about how you can benefit from smart, easy, and relatively investment-light changes that actually can produce change in desired consumption patterns. But before we dive deeper, let's go through some of the key insights that we generated with webinar 3. So we started off by discussing the fact that behavior smart thinking can enhance the competitiveness, the effectiveness of market success actions and sustainability actions, but it can also be extremely powerful in understanding unusual dynamics. For example, what we saw with COVID-19 created really an unusual reality. And so understanding traveler psychology and using behavior smart thinking really helped many destinations and businesses to prepare for a new consumer that was coming back after the crisis with new behaviors and new ways of thinking. We also talked about the fact that as market realities and our societies are changing, an increasing share of the decisions a traveler makes during their entire journey is actually channeled through our fast thinking system, or our System 1. And so when we think about developing awareness or promotional content, we need to think about how and what would work best for that fast thinking system. Traveler decision-making can be supported by simplifying choice sets, considering the order in which we present information, providing reference points and comparisons. So we use some examples to illustrate how exactly that works. And then we spent quite a bit of time talking about the relationship between psychology and pricing. We talked about the fact that behavior smart pricing strategies can really enhance profitability, but they can also encourage responsible behavior. We also mentioned that in the context of travel, where we are working with an intangible product, psychological price is often the only psychological signal that the consumer can use in order to make their buying decision. So now we are turning our eyes to the responsible traveler, and we will try to answer the question about how to make travelers make choices that are good for us as a business, as for our place where we belong, and how do we make these the choices that travelers actually engage in. Several reminders or refresher points. Today, we are dealing with a traveler who makes many of their buying decisions during their trip and when they're already at the destination, immersed, engaged, which means that many of these choices are quite influenced by their fast thinking pattern or fast thinking system. So reminding you that when we channel choices through our fast thinking decision-making pattern, that means that we look for shortcuts and environmental cues in order to select the option that we will go with. And very often this might be influenced also by what others are doing and what others seem to be going for. Again, what is very relevant here to remind ourselves that the context is extremely important and very often can be a driver of many of our choices, especially when we are in fast thinking decision-making mode. So in essence, what all of this leads to is that if we are realistic about how traveler decision-making happens, we need to account for the fact that many of the unsustainable choices that they're making are due to the fact that they're engraved or presented into the experience as the easier or the automatic choice that they can make. And in many cases, sustainable choices are somehow at conflict with the main reason, the main motivation that drives traveler behavior. And that's the pursuit of having a great experience and creating wonderful memories to remember, to take home. So this is what led us to a conclusion earlier in our series that we cannot possibly rely on the traveler to be the leader in or the engine that drives the transition from our current practices to more sustainable practices. So we should forget the idea for demand-driven sustainability and really look at how we can make sustainability part of the supply. So as businesses, we should look for opportunities to make sustainable choices part of the way that we operate and part of the experience design. And as such, to expect that sustainable choices will begin dominating traveler behavior. So let's look at how this actually works. I'm going to take an example or a topic that is very relevant and almost always of key interest for both destination authorities and businesses. And that's to increase the likelihood that visitors will spend on local food and drink. And this is important always because it is a great way to generate profitability, to generate profits for local businesses, to ensure that a higher share of the spend of the traveler stays in the local economy and goes to local businesses, their suppliers, and so on. So every time we want to try to influence traveler behavior in a certain direction, we need to think about the reasons why the current behavior is occurring. So in that sense, we want to think a little bit about what influences travelers' food choices, why they would choose non-local options in the first place. Of course, we can ask ourselves whether it makes sense to ask them to simply be responsible and use their sense of responsibility when they're choosing food and drink options. And think about how we can encourage these more. So let's start with understanding what influences the choices that travelers make when it comes to eating and drinking. So realistically, we know that the first thing that matters and that determines what people will choose to have for lunch or dinner is their personal taste. So whether they like certain foods, whether they have stronger preference for other foods, this is the main driver of their choices. However, when they travel, there's some other factors that will play a role. First, what feels lower risk? While there's some people who are eager to engage in novel experiences, novel tastes, trying novel foods, many actually would lean towards going for something familiar. So even if they're trying something that they haven't had before, they will probably seek to associate it with a type of food that they're familiar with and comfortable with. So familiarity bias is something that's quite powerful when it comes to people's eagerness to try something new during their travels. In some cases, people don't know what to order. Maybe the foods in the place they're visiting are relatively new to them. Maybe they don't have enough information to make a choice. So they are heavily influenced by what we refer to as social bias. So what seem to be the dominating choices of others. And in some cases, we have to recognize that people just go with whatever is the easiest. So imagine that after a long day of biking or kayaking or just exploring the destination, they just want to sit and exchange thoughts and observations with travel peers. So they just don't want to spend any effort to think about what to have and what not to have. So they just go with something that's quite easy, either whatever is at the top of the menu or just pasta or pizza, something that's quite easy and is risk-free. So all of these factors can influence the decision-making in one way or another during the decision-making process. Okay, so looking at this even in more specifics, why people would buy non-local in the first place? Why would visitors buy non-local? There are two groups of situations in which they would do that. The first one is associated with making a very aware choice. And this is when, for example, they might not like a certain item very much or at all. So in that case, they're mindfully avoiding a certain option. When they do not care about local origin, they simply don't care. So that's not something that they would even pay attention to. Another scenario is when price is their main factor, the main factor determining their choice, and price is more favorable towards the non-local option. We also have a scenario when they're making a choice based on lack of awareness. So, for example, they might be unaware that actually among the options they're considering, they're non-local items. They might be unable to distinguish between local and non-local. They also might not be thinking about local origin at the very moment when they're making a decision. So in essence, they care about, they would go for local in general, but at the moment when they're making the decision, they're thinking about something else and this doesn't become a factor. So there's actually a fair amount of situations when the behavior that we want to correct, buying non-local, is due to lack of awareness. The good news is that while the first three cases would require more effort and probably would involve the realization that we might not be able to trigger behavior change, in the second group of cases, we actually have a chance of influencing behavior and leading it in the right or the desired direction. Another piece of good news is that the second group actually is the dominating share of cases when travelers are buying non-local. So before we look at the tactics, let's consider what would happen if we ask people to simply be responsible. Now, we already talked about the fact that when people are on holiday or taking a weekend break, or when they're simply in their in leisure mode on a Saturday afternoon, their main driver is related to the current moment and to the selfish desire to experience more, to maximize the experience they're getting out of their trip, out of their restaurant visit, out of their walk, and so on. So their main focus is on that. Yes, there are truly responsible travelers who would always prioritize sustainability, who would be ready to trade off experience, to trade off comfort or some certain benefits. But the reality is that that segment is very, very small on the market and continues to be small on the market. So in that sense, unless you're dealing with representatives of that truly responsible travelers segment that can be influenced with sustainability messages, we really need to be realistic and opt for choice editing techniques. So that means that we need to design the choice sets and in a way that would facilitate and increase the likelihood that our guests will go for the responsible option, and that we would do that in a way that makes these sustainable options more desirable, more appealing, and easy to choose. So how do we do that? The reality is that that our shot at influencing the buying behavior and shifting from non-local to local depends on our ability to convince our guests that the benefits of buying the local product are much more compared to the benefits associated with buying non-local product. So that means that we should put our effort into highlighting everything that the traveler might perceive as a gain, and put it on the part of the equation that is associated with the local option. So what are some of the popular appeal factors that we can use to manipulate that equation? The first is to describe or frame the local foods as local, authentic, and as part of the experience of the destination. Remember that in the first session, we talked about the different choices that travelers make, and the fact that some are very operational, functional, and seek to be hassle-free, while others are focused more on how can we maximize the experience and the excitement and the memory creation. So food experiences very often belong to the second group. They are part of experiencing the destination, of connecting to the place. And so if we use the right wording and the right descriptions and highlight the fact that this food experience, trying this local meal, local dish, is part of your destination experience, can increase the likelihood that our guests will opt for it. The second set of factors is associated with health and well-being. There is an increasing share of people in general, including travelers, who care about well-being effects and who pay attention to how certain activities, certain foods are actually contributing to their health and well-being. So very often highlighting these is something that can influence choice and tilt it in the right direction. We can often also enhance that sense of gain or benefit by highlighting something that is unique about the recipe, about the way that certain produce is grown or prepared or presented. So anything that is rare, that is different from the more common practices can actually help us bring out the local option and make it more attractive in the eyes of the guest. Again, associated with that, anything that we can highlight as being handmade or produced in an unusual way is also quite important. And then highlighting limited availability is probably one of the most powerful ways to increase excitement and increase the sense of benefit for travelers in choosing that particular option. This is very easy when we're talking about seasonal foods, which are currently in season. So you can say that only in the month of October and November you can try this, or only in the month of March you have the opportunity to try this special dish. So another point that we made earlier is the fact that even if people in general care about local origin, maybe at the moment when they're choosing, they're just thinking about something else, or they're immersed in the conversation with their partner, and they're just not thinking about that. So this is where it's our job as a business to bring that out and make sure that they actually think about local origin at the moment of the decision making. Maybe they don't care, and in that situation we can't influence that. But if they do, if they care even a little bit, bringing up local origin and making it a factor at the moment when they're deciding can actually be quite important and powerful. So what can you do? You can include in the menu very easy to understand and see signals that relate to local origin. So several ways to do that. One is to place local meals in their own menu category. That is usually at the top of the menu or at the start of the menu. So you can have a section which is traditional local meals, 100% local, whatever you want to call it, but something that clearly identifies that the following meals are actually with local origin or with products, ingredients that have been sourced locally. The second thing you can do is actually to have some sort of a label or a signal that marks local meals. You can simply have a small symbol, or you can have a label that you put local traditional cuisine or 100% local that marks every meal that is local and traditional. And in some cases, when it's very difficult to say, okay, well, this meal is local or produced with local ingredients, then you can have something creative, such as an origin meter. We see that many restaurants, at least among the ones that we work with, are hesitant to call a meal 100% local if some of the ingredients or the products are actually not locally sourced. So in that sense, they feel more comfortable using such local origin meters to indicate which meals have a higher share, are prepared with higher share ingredient with a higher share of ingredients that are locally produced and sourced versus others who contain more and who are prepared with imported alternatives. This is also a good solution when the meals you're trying to highlight are not traditional as recipes, but are simply prepared with locally sourced products. So it might still be pasta or pizza or something that's fairly common, but it can be, but you can indicate that this one is produced almost entirely with products sourced from local farmers and local producers. Here's an illustration of how this is done at Hotel Internazionale. This is a hotel that's in Ticino region in Switzerland. So there, the desire was to indicate or to mark the local options that are presented at the morning buffet. With the breakfast buffet, as well as in the menu that is used for lunch and dinner at the hotel's restaurant. So you can see that the way that they approached it is by developing this small logo that indicates that the product that is marked with this logo is local. And you can see that we developed with them different labels. So the label that is used for locally sourced meals is the design that you see on the left, holding that symbol. And then on the right, you see an alternative, which is a bit more plain and which doesn't have the local origin symbol. So this is a good way and a fairly easy way to indicate local origin at the moment when people are making a decision and really maximize the likelihood that they will go for that. As we mentioned earlier, there is a variety of ways in which you can bring the sense of gain or benefit when you are presenting local alternatives. Adding appeal is possible also when you describe local options as freshly prepared, especially if they're seasonal, all natural, extra healthy, and so on and so forth. Now, of course, these need to be truthful, but anything that you think is a benefit and an advantage can actually play a significant role. You can also manipulate the description with which you're presenting a meal, and you can add extra emotional and attractive descriptors such as tasty, colorful, incomparable, and so on and so forth. So all of these can play a role. So here's an example. Instead of presenting a meal only with the ingredients, by listing the ingredients that go into that, which in many cases you are required to do, and you do, you can actually turn that into a nice, attractive description that has much more emotional and engaging style. And it still lists and mentions all of the ingredients that are included in the meal, but it does it in a way that turns it into a story and really makes that option irresistible. So you can see that from the classical listing in a menu on the left, we go on to our fresh gazpacho soup, which is a taste of summer in a bowl, made with ripe tomatoes, crunchy cucumbers, sweet red pepper, and a touch of onion. We talk about the secret ingredient and so on and so forth. So it really engages the menu reader in a very different way and really increases the likelihood that they're going to go for that simply because we've described it in an irresistible way. In some cases, we can also use incentives. So maybe we can offer an add-on and say that, okay, this vegetarian meal comes with our homemade bread, And our secret recipe dressing is complementary with this salad, or we can offer packages. And that can serve as shortcut for an all local choice. So you can say that our 100% local package includes a traditional salad, traditional main, and glass of our local wine or our homemade lemonade. It doesn't really matter, but you sort of bring everything together. And then it actually becomes very easy and attractive for the guests to opt for that option because you've made it quite easy to choose everything at once. One thing that I want to mention at the end of this more detailed example is pricing. Now, in some places, local options end up being much lower priced simply because of the fact that the cost of sourcing them is much lower, and that represents actually some risks. In many cases, especially when travelers are dealing with an unknown or unfamiliar meal food option, the only thing that they can use as a signal is the price. Remember that we discussed that last time. So in that sense, if they see a price that's much lower than what they see as the price levels of items they're familiar with, that might trigger a sense of suspicion that maybe there's something wrong, that this is really much cheaper, so I don't know whether it's okay to go with that. So in that sense, the recommendation that I want to make is that if economically there are situations when the local meals or the local drinks end up being much below the imported alternatives, you may want to close that gap. So it's fine if they are fairly close and the local option is still a little bit lower, that's fine. But when the difference is quite big, it might be problematic, and it might actually trigger some suspicion. Another thing, something that we mentioned last time, but I do want to bring that up again, is that in many cases, pricing packages can actually be extremely powerful in increasing the likelihood that travelers will spend on local options. So packaging a local meal with a hiking experience or another adventure is something that saves them the need to think about and make the effort to choose. It does good for the destination and all the players within it. And then when you use claims that relate to unique approach, unique technology, technique of preparing something, or limited availability, that should be reflected in the price and should come at premium because the client simply expects that. Otherwise, they might suspect that the claim is not truthful or reliable. So these are all important considerations when we think about ways to encourage local buying. But as I illustrated with this more detailed example, it's important to recognize that in some cases, we are dealing with awareness as the main factor that contributes to undesired behavior. And in that sense, it's actions or behavior change techniques that seek to eliminate that lack of awareness that can help us solve our problem. And as you can see, many of them are not that difficult. So I want to continue that line of thought and actually take you through a way of thinking or an approach that we often utilize when we seek to use behavior change as part of our efforts to encourage more sustainable options in a way that's not disruptive for the client, but also for us as businesses. So we refer to that approach as the first mile. And it really represents an opportunity to use easy, smart, disruption-free, investment-light techniques to trigger change in the right direction, and in many cases to actually make a big difference. So the idea here is that many of our sustainability efforts, whether it's to lower the carbon footprint or the environmental footprint of the tourism economy, or to reduce waste, or to transition from single-use plastics to reusable alternatives. All of these behavior change journeys are long, and in many cases, they require complex actions. They require policy changes, perhaps new technologies, so new ways of doing things, very often new infrastructure, especially when we're talking about carbon footprint, energy efficiency, water efficiency, and so on. So all of these things take a lot of time. They usually take a lot of investment. In some cases, we actually do not have the technology yet that can solve the problem. So it feels overwhelming, investment intensive, and really extended into the future. So while these won't go away, and we still will have to tackle them at some point, there's actually a set of behavior change techniques that can help us get started and really cover this first mile or first several miles of the journey that we need to be making, simply by making the desired options easier, by making them default, by making them more attractive. And this is what the first mile approach seeks to do. It really looks at focusing on what can we change now, rather than sometime in the future. How can we do it with smart changes that are low investment and disruption free? And again, we think about what behaviors or what decisions people are making now, and how do we want to change that in the future so that we can identify the area where behavior change needs to occur. So how do we make the change? We make the change by understanding what is holding people, or what is shifting them from what we want them to do to what they're currently doing. And in many cases, these are barriers. Maybe it's hassle, maybe it's lack of information, maybe it's price, maybe it's something else, but they're barriers that block the choice that we want to encourage. So that means making it easy, right? Removing these barriers. In some cases, we seek to add appeal, to provide incentives, to increase that sense of gain, to make it appealing, to make that responsible choice more appealing. In other cases, just as we illustrated a moment ago with these signaling techniques, is that we need to make the guest or the visitor aware at the right moment. So we bring up to their attention that this meal specifically is local and the other one is not locally sourced. In some cases, we use a little bit of social pressure. I know we used that example earlier, but we'll illustrate in a moment again. And in other cases, we simply eliminate or restrict options. We simply make it impossible for people to choose choose the options that are bad or unfavorable for our business or our destination. So I want to use several examples to illustrate that and to help you imagine how all of this works. The first one, as we said, the best way to make the desired option easy is by changing default options. And the most common example is, of course, towel changing, where instead of changing towels by default every day, and asking people to consider reusing their towels, you actually flip the default and you change towels only upon request and set that as the default. And so what this does is that it makes it very easy for people to reuse their towel and they don't have to make an effort to do that. So simply by flipping the default option, especially when it relates to choices, which are very often actually not that important for people. People don't really care that much about their towels. You can increase the likelihood that the majority will go with whatever is the better option because you have set it as the default. Now, I'm using the example of towels, but the same thing can apply to a variety of other choices that we make, especially ones that relate to functional decision making, these practical operational decisions that travelers make as part of their journey. So another example is in Norway, we have started working with some car rental companies to encourage them to shift the default option to electric vehicles. So every time you go and rent a vehicle, by default, you are assigned or given an electric vehicle as an option. And only if you choose specifically and indicate that you want a fuel-based alternative, you can actually see the alternative options. And so again, the idea is that in a context where electric vehicles are easy to use, there's supporting infrastructure everywhere, there's really no risk of you being deserted and without sufficient charge, which is the case in Norway. Then by changing the default, you're making sure that everybody who's inclined to drive electric will go for that. And those who are uncomfortable, maybe because they have less experience or have some anxiety associated with this, will still have the option of going with the more traditional choice. So changing default options is one of the first mile techniques that very often can be extremely powerful. The second is, again, signaling at the decision point. So similar to what we illustrated earlier with the local origin, this is an example. This is actually a Swedish company that works with climate scientists to use very, very detailed and rigorous systems to estimate the carbon footprint of meals. And so they help restaurants, thanks to very detailed account of the ingredients that go into every meal, to actually come up with an estimate of the carbon footprint of every meal. And not only that, because they realize that telling somebody that their pasta comes with 3.7 kilograms, it doesn't really mean much. They don't know whether that's little, that's too much. They actually enable restaurants to use a green, yellow, red visual system of indicating whether a certain meal is more on the heavier side or on the greener side. So that brings carbon footprint as a factor in the decision-making choice. And it's true that not everybody will care about that. So there are people who don't really consider this as something they should pay attention to. But for many people, this can become a factor of decision when they're trying to decide between these 2 or 3 options that we always kind of put in a short list when we are looking at the restaurant menu. To the extent that experiments with the system show that it can increase the choices of the preferences for green meals by between 11 and 25%. So the third option is to make the desired option part of the design. So this technique is really powerful for things such as making experiences plastic-free, making journeys carbon neutral, and so on. This is when we actually weave the desired option in the design and in essence make the sustainable choice non-negotiable. For example, if we're looking to make an experience plastics free, that means giving our guests a bottle at the beginning of the journey, reusable water bottle, and making sure that they know where are the water refill stations, or what are the water refill stops that we're going to include in the itinerary. And so in essence, we are making any undesired alternative impossible to choose because it's absolutely unnecessary. Another technique is to present desired options as the more appealing option. And the one that you know that guests will prefer, simply because it adds to their experience or to their expectation for more. An example for that would be to work, for example, with front desk staff at a hotel when they provide recommendations for restaurant or places to see, to also couple that with suggestions to get there by foot rather than by taxi or another motorized vehicle. And the way to do that is by training them to provide guidelines for routes which are attractive, which have something interesting, which offer something interesting. So something such as, here's the restaurant that we recommend for your dinner, and if you're willing to consider going there by foot, here's a route that you can take that will take you through the oldest street in town with some very charming houses that you're only able to see if you walk, because they're not accessible with any vehicle. So something like that really places the focus on how this is attractive and how this can enhance the experience that they're having, rather than the responsibility or responsible nature of that. Another one, as we mentioned earlier, another example is when we want to introduce something as a social norm and add a little bit of social pressure. So this would be presenting a desired option as the accepted social norm. So an example for that would be to, if a hotel provides its guests with reusable shopping bags as part of the accessories that are at their disposal in the room, or as part of a service that's available in the hotel lobby, with the message that people in our area usually avoid using single-use shopping bags, and so we grant you with this shopping bag to allow you to fall into the same norm, buy your presents, gift souvenirs, and so on, and leave it after that for other guests to use. So something like that can really leave the impression that this is how things are done around here, but you're also making it very easy for people to follow that norm. And then, as I mentioned, a very powerful technique, whenever it's possible and whenever it's relevant, is to eliminate undesired option. And the example that I want to give here comes from the Lofoten Islands in Norway. This is northern Norway, above the Arctic Circle, a beautiful destination, but also a fragile one. So many hotels and accommodations in Lofoten have started offering reservations only for 3 or more days, because through the work that they have done as networks of local providers, or with the local destination authorities, they realized that coming for 2 days on the islands is not sufficient to generate sufficient economic and social benefits in order to offset the environmental footprint of getting there, because in most cases it's by plane. So in that sense, it was many of these operators, and I want to assure you that many of these are actually small, even tiny accommodation facilities with 3 or 7 rooms. But many of them have started making it impossible to stay for less than 3 days. So this is a good example of how a business can actually use elimination of an option as a way of nudging guests to make the right choice. So I hope that with these techniques, I was able to illustrate how the first mile works and how with some fairly disruption-free and investment-light changes, you can actually shift the way that people consume the destination and the way that the likelihood that they will choose what is good for our business, but also what is good for our destination and for our community and the collaborators with whom we engage. Now, for the last few minutes of today, I do want to talk a little bit about timing. One of the keys to success when we are using behavior change techniques is to consider the moment in which they have a shot at influencing behavior. Because there are many moments when we can communicate something or we can use a technique to nudge certain behavior. But if that is past the moment when the person can actually change their behavior, or when it's not in the right context, when their attention is diverted or something else, then we have lost an opportunity. So when we think about behavior smart, we not only have to consider the right tool towards the desired behavior, but we actually need to think about the right time when it can make a difference and when the context does not prevent us from triggering change. The first example is something that we are seeing now a lot of cafes and restaurants do, which is to encourage people to use their own cup and save both in terms of costs, but also to lower their environmental footprint. Now, many cafes think that is a good idea, and in generally it could be, but just think about the realistic situation of when you walk into a cafe and you are ordering coffee or tea. If you see that message there at that point, there's really very little that you can do because you are past the moment when you could have put in your bag your cup, your reusable cup. So unless you actually carry that with you already, which means that if you've made the effort to put it in your bag, then in that invitation is not changing much because you're already mindfully into the habit of using your own cup when you drink outside of your home. Then this message doesn't really have a shot at changing your behavior unless you actually are invited to buy a cup there in hope that next time you can reuse it again, something that Starbucks is using as a strategy. So it's really important to think what else is going on at the moment when we are presenting or encouraging a certain alternative. Can we rely that the attention of the person we are seeking to influence will be there? Can they take action? And will that action lead to the desired change? So considering all of these is quite important. I do want to play for you a quick video that tells the story about one of the most successful destination pledges, and we'll talk about timing again there.
Now, if you're heading to the Pacific island of Palau, you'll be signing up to a new pledge.
Human impact on Earth's environment is one of the biggest challenges facing the world today. The small island nation of Palau was feeling these impacts acutely. tourists were damaging reefs, littering oceans and poaching protected species. But how could a small local population with limited resources police the high volume of visitors? What if we made the tourists police themselves? Introducing the Palau Pledge, a first-of-its-kind immigration policy for good. All visitors now need to sign an environmental pledge to gain admittance into Palau. Stamped into the passport of international arrivals, the pledge is a formal promise to Palau's children.
Children of Palau,
I take this pledge
to preserve and protect your beautiful and unique island home.
To implement this policy, government, the tourist industry and citizens were brought together. A new visa entry stamp was designed and issued in multiple languages. And immigration laws were permanently changed.
The joy that comes with a pledge is the recognition that, hey, I can make a difference.
But we didn't stop at the passport stamp. We redesigned the tourism experience via a website, an in-flight film, a passport insert, local education, business accreditation, signage, penalties and collateral. Launched at the UN, the Palau Pledge has been praised by international leaders and groups. Influencers helped inspire people to take the pledge online in solidarity with Palau.
Are you already seeing tourists behaving differently?
The awareness level is very high.
Leonardo DiCaprio has been quick to endorse the pledge.
The reaction on social media has been widespread.
The Palau Pledge has raised global awareness of the responsibility this generation has to the next. But its biggest impact is local, in Palau.
I hope my children can see the beautiful place as I see today.
And here's the story. So this is the destination pledge that was launched by the Palau, and the story there is the following. Palau wanted to make travelers aware of the footprint that they're leaving when they're exploring the beautiful but fragile ecosystems of the country. So they opted for the following design. The pledge was actually presented as a stamp that is placed in your passport upon immigration check. So when you arrive in the country and you go through immigration check, the immigration officer would stamp this in your passport, and you would actually have to sign and commit that during your stay, you will use resources with care, you will not do anything that's going to harm the environment or animal life, and so on and so forth. And this is done at the moment that you're entering the country. In addition to that, there's a video that you watch before you land on the island, and given that this is an island, there's no other way of getting there. So the likelihood that you will miss the video is very, very little. So you already know that this pledge is going to be in your passport, that you're going to have to commit to that. And you learn what are the behaviors that you need to follow. The symbols that are introduced in the video then appear throughout your experience in signs, which are placed everywhere throughout the island. And so what this does is that first, it makes the commitment a very formal part, and it makes it part of the activation or the starting point of that behavior. It's not something you sign 3 months earlier. It's not something you see on the website and you commit to. It's not a flyer that you come across. It's something that's put in your passport, quite formal, and you commit to that at the beginning of your journey. It's not something that you are distracted and not paying attention to. So it's quite certain that you are making this in an aware mode. And also with these recurring symbols that show up at different signs throughout the journey on different days, in different moments. When you go to the beach, you see a sign that reminds you that you have committed to not touch and not damage sea life and the fragile ecosystems. When you're on the streets, you see that you're reminded not to drop any waste and so on and so forth. So all of that keeps reinforcing and keeping the commitment top of mind with different signals and reminders. So this is an example of how important it is to consider at what point do we have a chance at really getting visitors to commit to a certain mode and actually stick to it. And this is why the alternative design that many destinations use, where they ask people to sign a pledge somewhere on their website much before they actually are decided whether they will visit at all or not, is really not that effective because it doesn't really lead to any consequences. So in that sense, timing is essential when we seek to influence behavior, including sustainable choices. So this brings us to the end of today and allows me to summarize 3 points that I hope I have managed to communicate and share with you with today's content. And this is that sustainability is possible despite the fact that travelers do not put great priority on it. And not only that, it can actually be made non-negotiable. It can work when it's presented in ways that make it easy and exciting for the traveler to choose. And we should always make sure that it's never in conflict with the main motivation, the main drive of traveler decision-making, and that's to have an enjoyable, memory-creating experience. With this, I want to thank you and to again invite you to use all of our free resources which are present in our Knowledge Corner. If we have managed to spark your interest in using behavior change, and to wish you good luck with making sustainability part of the way you work and making it natural and easy for travelers to choose the options that are good for your business and good for your destination. Thank you so much for the attention.